Hello. Okay, there we go. As you can see, there's a lot of information being presented regarding this issue, which unfortunately a lot of the information has only been one-sided. So tonight we have the opportunity to hear from a panel of a wide range of experts on this issue as far as what I consider to be the truth about the charter school amendment, what it does, what it does not do. And then the ultimate decision is going to be up to you. Each and every voter in the state of Georgia will be able to make the decision of whether or not we make this amendment. So without any further ado, let me introduce this illustrious panel. First of all, my colleague and longtime friend who has championed this legislation in the Senate. He has worked very hard to improve education, and I can't think of anybody at the General Assembly who has worked harder, spent more time in political capital, and research into improving public education and school choice, and that's my colleague, the Senate Majority Leader, Chip Rogers. Another, your choice. If I know Chip, he's going to sit on the far right. So,
move the chair a little further.
Another, he's now a veteran of the Georgia legislature who I got to know over the past several years, who is a strong conservative and a very strong voice for education reform and the Constitution, is my friend and colleague, Representative Chris Coomer. Now, we just didn't want to have a completely political panel here today because a lot of the information that is out there is regarding the cost of the cost to the state that the charter school amendment would potentially bring. I've also heard the case made that this would cause a negative impact on economic development, which is a concern to everybody. So we also have on the panel Professor Christine Rees, economic professor for the Georgia Institute of Technology. Professor. And I will warn you, Professor, there are many Bulldog fans out here today, but we will... Okay. And she told me that she is a conservative as well, so there are conservatives in our post-secondary education. Also, and if you've seen any of the videos that have been out there regarding charter schools, and I see this face when I turn on TV. If you turn on any of the news channels, you're going to see his face. He is a strong proponent. You've seen him in some of the videos, and he is what I consider the face of the charter school amendment for many out there, especially in the metro Atlanta area. And it's the founder of 100 Dads and a former PTA president, Rich Thompson. And our last panelist, who is the president of the Georgia Charter School Association, and he has been one busy gentleman over the past few months, and we're looking forward to hear him enlighten us on charter schools, Mr. Tony Roberts. Now, we have all been privy to many debates recently, and so we don't want to have any laughing or negative comments out loud by any of our panelists, which I'm sure we won't have. And as far as moderators go, I'm going to try not to interject my own ideas and opinions, but try to keep things flowing. And as Rob had mentioned, we have 10 pre-prepared questions, and these questions were prepared not to just sway the audience one way or the other, but they were questions that were selected because they're some of the most prominent of the issues that are brought up by this video and by many of the opponents to Amendment 1. And if we make it through these in a relatively short amount of time, we will open up for questions from the audience as well. The first question is it has been stated that charter schools under this amendment will be private and/or for-profit schools. Is this true? It has been stated that the charter schools under this amendment will be private and/or for-profit schools. Is this true? I think maybe start off with Tony. Would you like to lead us off with that question? And then after he speaks, then any of the other panelists, in whatever order you feel led, that follow up, we'd like to hear from all of you.
Sure. Thank you for being here tonight and for listening to this group. We've all talked about this so much that we almost live, sleep, and eat it. In fact, I should eat more of that and less of food, as you can tell. But, well, you can laugh at stuff like that, right? Okay, don't hold back and I'll tell you something funny. But the question is, are any of the charter schools under the amendment going to be private or for-profit schools? This is a myth that is being told. Georgia law requires that every charter school, as a public school, be a 501c3, if you know the IRS regulations, non-profit organization. Now, why are they saying this? It's a little distortion. What I want to explain is the opponents are saying this because they have learned that there are some management companies that are hired by local groups to help them operate the charter schools. And they have focused on them saying, aha, that's why this is bad, because people are going to make money on this, and that's why some are even contributing to this. And on the face of that, you think, oh, that makes sense. But then you look a little deeper and look at all of the traditional public schools, school systems in Georgia. And I would just pose you a question. How many of our school systems would be able to operate if they did not do business with for-profit companies? They couldn't buy any textbooks. They couldn't have any buildings built. When's the last time you had a building built by a nonprofit company? When did you buy a book that's by a nonprofit company? Schools have traditionally contracted for many things from for-profit companies, and really it's mostly a good thing because it can save money to the taxpayer. There are many things that are contracted for in addition to the kind of things I've described. One is services. Of course, there are attorneys and those kinds of people, consultants. But we learned recently of a company that contracts with several school districts in the state of Georgia at a cost of $653 million a year. One company. And what do? They offer tutoring services in the schools. Now, I'm really not against that, because if our kids need tutoring, that's wonderful. But I think it's wrong for some to say, well, there shouldn't be any for-profit connection at all in charter schools, and yet in other schools it's an everyday practice. So the short answer is no, they will all be, by Georgia law, nonprofit 501c3 organizations, but they may contract for some or a part of their services from both nonprofit and for-profit companies.
Okay, thank you. Now, I'm in a for-profit business. I do IT services, and some of my customers are public school systems, so in every school system they do contract. Mr. Thompson, following up with this question, is there a benefit for not having a for-profit? I mean, why would we just stick to the management of nonprofit? Are all the charter school administrative companies out there nonprofit?
Well, there are companies out there that operate for-profit entities. They're called EMOs, Education Management Organizations. The only difference between them and, say, an organization like KIPP or Achieve First, which is a CMO, a charter management organization, is their tax status. But they provide the same similar services to a school that the traditional school board provides. For instance, when it comes to providing a curriculum or a payroll service, or perhaps a transportation service, providing means for the kids to get to and from school. These are all services that can be provided by a for-profit or a non-profit entity. and it's just a matter of which is a better fit for the particular school. I have the benefit of having two daughters who have participated in both, and they have provided the choice and opportunity for our family that we desired, and have provided a degree of service that was far better than that which I got from the traditional sector.
Senator Rogers, does the legislation itself prohibit for-profit organizations from running the charter schools?
Not for being a management organization, but there's a real simple way to solve this problem. How about we just tell every central office, every superintendent, every assistant superintendent in the state tomorrow that if you're really against profit, then you should work for free. Because that's what they're saying. Because the management organization that's running the school is the same thing as the central office at your local school system. So if the management company is not allowed to make any money, then every superintendent in the state should come to work tomorrow and say, I'm no longer going to take a paycheck because I'm going to be pure. Because no one should ever profit off of this. And since when in the United States of America is profit a bad word? I mean, I feel like I'm in the former Soviet Union. There's nothing wrong with profit. But at the end of the day, as a taxpayer, I have two expectations for these schools. Number one, they deliver a better product, in other words, better educated children. And number two, they do it for a lower cost. If they accomplish a better return at a lower cost, why would I be concerned as to who profits in that mix? Because if that's working, let's replicate it over and over again. But again, the simple challenge to all of our friends and all of the superintendents across the state who are donating lots of money to try to defeat this thing to protect their monopoly is if you truly believe this, if you are dedicated to this notion that no for-profit company should ever manage a school, then you should come to work tomorrow and say, I will no longer draw a paycheck. My $200,000 paycheck, I'll no longer take it. I will no longer take any benefits. I will do this for free. I'll be anxiously waiting that happening tomorrow.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Coomer, you and I were in a forum recently where this was brought up that this is simply a way of Republicans padding the pockets of their crony corporations. Would you like to opine on
Sure,
that?
I would. Before I answer that, let me go back to the first question and add one more comment. Part of the question was, are these public or private entities? And these are public schools. They're open to all students in the attendance zone, just like students are allowed to attend any public school now. So there's not private schools. We're not setting up private schools through the charter system, and I want to make that clear too. But to get back to your question about people essentially taking care of their friends through this process, I have personally had conversations with the governor, members of the governor's staff. We've had this discussion. And it's almost, if it weren't so disingenuous, it would be funny, this part of the discussion, because frankly, there's really not there's not an avenue for a lot of private companies to come in and make a big chunk of money on this process. Ironically, it's really been the stronghold of associations, which is what we call teachers' unions in Georgia, basically. Associations involved in education, and really recalcitrant local strongmen in political office who have been overseeing failing systems that are caught up in system-wide investigations into cheating scandals, systems that cannot keep accreditation. And in those systems, the children are the losers, and they have no choice. They have no option for a better education. And this amendment is really about making sure those kids have that option. And the other, talking about bottom lines and where this really comes down to, everything I've heard in opposition, as I've discussed this with other people, everything I've seen on TV, is really a parade of horribles that, frankly, are make-believe scenarios. Because we're not talking about doing something that hasn't been done. We're talking about continuing a system we've seen success with in Georgia for the last 10 years. A system that we know works. And the most disappointing part is those opponents who are well-informed know that this system has worked and will continue to work. And so you really have to ask yourself, why are they opposed? And I think that's when you should follow the money, as the video said.
Barry, let me follow up. The math is so easy here. This is what frustrates us, and you'll probably tell at some point I get frustrated over this, is because we keep chasing rabbits in this discussion. Because every time we disprove another one of their lies, they come back with something else. You saw the video, and what did they say? They came with this story that the legislature cut $1 billion in spending. Well, that's not true. You can go to the Department of Education website, see what the spending was 3 years ago, see what it is today. It's not gone down. But setting that aside for a moment, okay? What is their argument? Their argument time and again is they come to the legislature and they say, you've cut all this money, we can't make it work, there's no way we can continue to do our jobs with this amount of money. Square that with the statement they're making about for-profit companies. Think about this for a second. They're saying they don't have enough money to even operate the schools at the level that we're funding them now. However, the charter schools, which we funded at 62% of that, so 38% less, somehow there's going to be hundreds of millions of dollars of profit. Now, how does that work? If you don't have enough money at your level right now, and the guy down the street's going to have to do it at 62%, where does this magical hundreds of millions of dollars of evil profit show up? It can't. Again, if you apply basic mathematics to most of their arguments, they'll quickly melt away. But the problem is they just go on to the next argument.
Professor, following up on that, in my experience from my time that I have worked in the government, predominantly in the military, but also working as a government contractor, it's been my experience that typically private industry can do a task more efficiently and at less cost than the government. From your experience, does that play in the management of these charter schools and operation? Of course, any other ideas that you have on the subject?
Well, is this on? Absolutely it does, and I think it's really the core of the issue. And it's all about something called other people's money. Is this not on? It's all about something called other people's money. We just saw a story break that the Atlanta public school system. You just have to hold it real close. Okay, the Atlanta public school system is renovating Maynard Jackson High School. And the Atlanta public school official who is in charge of doing that selected an air conditioning system that's the same as a competitor's air conditioning system, spending $370 million extra. And you can imagine why he would do this. It turns out he's been friends with the representative about the other air conditioning system for years and their expensive trips involved and so on. But that kind of fraud, abuse, waste, corruption, whatever you want to call it, is not going to happen in a charter school because you've got school districts that are overseeing, one district office is maybe overseeing possibly 160,000 students. That's a big business and a big organization, and you can get away with things in a situation like that. Whereas if you have the alternative, as we're talking about a number of quote-unquote districts or charter schools, which are in effect their own district, a number of those schools, they're going to be run not by a school district overseeing 160,000 kids. They're going to be run by their own local committee made of parents and community members, and probably overseeing 1,000 kids. And they're their kids. So what about this guy who went ahead and charged up the extra $370 million? He just probably thought nobody would notice, and whose money was it anyway? But you see in the charter schools, people are scrimping for every penny that they can save. And why is that? It's because that money is going to go directly into the classroom of their children. And we all know that education is about putting money in the classroom, not in the overhead, not in all the other things that can be purchased, but it's by having good teachers and putting money in the classroom. So the bottom line is that the charters are small. Everybody who's in control is making decisions about their children. And so they're going to make sure that that money, every cent of it they can get, is going to go into that classroom. And that's really what makes the difference.
Okay, thank you. I thought that was a very good discussion on the first question. Now, the second question, it may be simply answered by the first panelist, but again, we'll feel free to expand. Rich, I'll start with you. What is the difference between an independent charter school and conversion charter schools or charter systems?
Well, first of all, I say there is an extremely big difference. Let's start with let's work our way backwards. A charter system is when an existing traditional public school system decides they want to merely change the name on the building outside of the school board headquarters. They go from being the ABC Public School Board to the ABC Public Charter School Board. Now, in doing so, there are some things that are added to their market mix. They can have a little bit more flexibility, can adjust classroom size, and do some small innovative things. But the most important part that I think they cannot fully fulfill is they become a little resistant to giving more power to parents. Because you see, the same board that governed the traditional system now also governs the charter system. There was no additional parent empowerment in a charter system. Now, on to the second version, there's a conversion charter school. A conversion charter school is a standalone school that, for whatever reason, a local school board decides that they want to do something different at that particular location. So they convert from being a traditional school into being a charter school. However, if that school is a part of a local school district, the people who are running that particular conversion charter school are still the same people, the 5 to 7 or 9 people who were elected at the traditional school board level. Everybody follow? Now, the option that I like the most is the independent charter model. Because in the independent charter model, what happens is parents, teachers, and community leaders, they birth an idea that they can provide educational services a little bit better than the folks around the corner. So they put together a charter application that says we're going to provide these types of educational opportunities for our kids. They may modify their school day. Instead of going from 8 to 3, they may decide to go from 7:30 to 5. And maybe even want to go every other Saturday, just so they can make sure they get some extra seat time to make sure the kids are proficient in math, science, reading, and so forth. The independent charter school, because it is made up of parent, teachers, and community leaders, has the flexibility to respond on the dime to the needs of those parents. There's no long, drawn-out bureaucracy of having to try to go through the school teacher, the department head, the assistant principal, the principal, maybe the district deputy superintendent. There's no big hierarchy. There's the parents, there's the principal, there's the board. So if they decide to do something different in an independent charter school, the chain of command is a lot more fluid. I can give you one specific example that happened at my daughter's school about a year ago. We participated in a program where all of the kids in the 6th grade, if they went through a training program on a Saturday morning, they had the opportunity through a partnership, through a public-private partnership, to get a personal computer of their own that they could do some additional math and science stuff at home. But they had to attend this 4-hour training. Well, everybody went through the training the first week, and then the second week they were supposed to get the computers delivered. But the parents had to sit through the training too. Well, a lot of the parents sat there in the meeting and they were very, impressed with the number of programs that were on the computer. But then a question appeared. One parent asked, do these computers have the program Study Island, which was a tutorial program that people use for their standardized test? And the principal said no, but it's got a lot of other good stuff. And he went on to talk some more. Then, about 5 minutes go by, another hand popped up. He said, excuse me, Mr. Chang, but where can we find out how to get this program? And he said, well, it's something that actually the district provides, but you can't get access to it individually. Okay? About 3 minutes go by, another hand goes up. Well, Mr. Chang, if we wanted to buy this, who would we talk to and how much would it cost? In that instant, the principal of our school stopped dead in his tracks. He said, okay, by show of hands, how many people would like to have Study Island access on these computers? And pretty much about 80-90% of the room raised a hand. He said, okay, I'll tell you what. I'll go back and talk to the board. I'll see if we can make some adjustments, and I'll get back with you. In a week, we were supposed to get the computers on Saturday. By Thursday afternoon, all the entire 6th graders got a username and password for Study Island, And on Saturday morning, they picked up the computers and they were able to start using that program in preparation. That's the difference between an independent charter school, a conversion charter school, and a charter system, in my opinion.
If I may add, there's another dimension to the charter system. I think it's really sad that in the video, such as we saw, there's the claim that charter schools created by the state or authorized by the state would get more money. Now, you have to be careful what they say. They get more state money. They don't get any local money, more state money. But I think that's really ironic because the charter systems, and I think Cartersville's a charter system, the students get $100, or the school gets $100 more per student for being a charter system. Now that may not sound like a lot of money, but Fulton County just converted to the charter system, and it amounted to $10 million. Now, if they follow the argument that they're making about charter schools, all the school systems that aren't charter systems will just rise up and protest and say, this isn't fair. They're taking away money from the big pot that could be ours. But they're not, because they're all thinking, maybe we should become a charter system so we can get $100 extra per student.
Barry, can I put this in Bartow County terms?
Absolutely.
He did a great job on the charter system. Let me put it in Bartow County terms as far as a conversion school and an independent charter school. All right, take the McDonald's in Cartersville. Does anybody in this room know whether the McDonald's in Cartersville is owned and run by the franchisor, or is there a franchisee? Does anybody know?
It's the Cutco.
It's locally owned?
No, it's the Cutco. It's company.
Okay. All right, so it's a corporate store, right? So a conversion charter would kind of be like if somebody here in Cartersville owned the McDonald's. Now, they may do a little bit better job because they're working it as the independent person than a corporately owned store. But I would hazard a guess that most of the McDonald's you walk into, or most of the Burger Kings or whatever, you have no idea whether it's a corporate store or whether it's independently owned. Now, the four-way, we all know that the four-way, that's like an independent charter because there are no other four-ways. There's one four-way. And the people back there flipping the burgers, they own it and they run it, and you know that. So that's kind of the difference in Cartersville-Bartow County terms of the difference between a conversion charter and an independent charter. Four-way, independent, McDonald's, conversion.
Okay. Any other panelists on this particular issue? If not, we'll move on to the next question. The video was brought up, and I appreciate that we were able to watch that video because there was an accusation made in that video, which I have heard throughout the state, and especially in this area, and that is that Georgia already has all the laws needed to approve charter schools, and that this amendment would create a duplicate agency to do what the state school board already does. Can we have a discussion with what led to this amendment to start with? Because I think the history behind the amendment is why we're actually having this amendment helps to answer that question. And during that discussion, do we need this separate agency? And Representative Coomer, would you like to lead off?
Sure, sure. One of the buzz phrases of conservative politics in Georgia and this country has been, we don't tolerate judicial activism. We don't allow it. We're against it 100%. And really, this amendment issue arose because 4 of the 7 Supreme Court justices in our state Supreme Court became judicial activists, in this decision at least, and they frankly read words into the Constitution which are not there. And as a result, they struck down the charter system that's existed for the last decade in Georgia. And that really is what has precipitated the necessity for a charter amendment. And frankly, we talked a little bit about enabling legislation. With the enabling legislation that's been agreed on between Democrats and Republicans in the House and Senate and the governor's office, and the state superintendent's office, frankly, who was involved from day one in all of the legislative discussion, who had, in fact, approved the enabling legislation and the charter amendment until about 2 months ago. All of that language really restricts the system significantly from the far more open system we had until the Supreme Court decision. But to answer the question, it is a reaction to judicial activism that brings us to this amendment initiative.
Senator Rogers, following up on that, does this amendment, or the passing of this amendment, would it create a duplicate agency? I mean, you and I have all fought against duplication and waste and larger government, and some of our own compatriots on the conservative side have made the argument that this is government duplication. It's creating a new bureaucracy. Can you answer that question and explain if it does, why do we need it?
Well, first of all, if it wasn't necessary, I can assure you we wouldn't have passed it. Because, I mean, I know that sounds a little silly, but we would not have gone through this exercise, which was a long, arduous process, if we didn't need to go through it. No one, I mean, if it's already the existing law, we could have already done this. Obviously, we wouldn't have done it. Supreme Court ruled because there was something in place, the State Charter Commission, that I believe, as Representative Coomer said, for political reasons, they saw fit to get rid of it. But the real question is will this commission be another bureaucracy? This gets a little frustrating as well, because remember, the function of the commission is to perform as an appeals process to an applicant, a charter applicant who's turned down at the local level. So all this commission would do is say yes or no to the applicant, the charter applicant, as to whether they believe that is a charter applicant that should receive a charter to begin running a school. Once that happens, it's not the charter commission that's hiring teachers. It's not the charter commission that's determining what books they're going to buy. It's not the charter commission that's going to find out the location. It's not the charter commission that's going to have anything at all to do with the day-to-day operation of the school. The day-to-day operation of the school is going to be run, as Dr. Reese said, by the parents and by the volunteers at that individual school. All the Charter Commission is, essentially, is an appeals process for an applicant that gets turned down at the local level. Now, why would they get turned down at the local level? To go back and use my restaurant analogy again, if you went and asked the McDonald's in Cartersville if they wanted Burger King to open up next door, and you said, look, it's your choice. You can either allow Burger King to open up next door, or you can turn down Burger King to open up next door. How many of them do you think would say, that's a great idea, let's open up a Burger King next door to my McDonald's? No one. So all this is an appeals process for all those Burger Kings that get turned down. And if you look at the way the commission worked before it was ruled unconstitutional, it worked exceptionally well. They didn't just give the green light to everybody. In fact, there were, 86 applicants, I believe, and only 16 or 17 got approved. So they were very picky and choosy. And remember, these people are working for free. We're not paying them anything. These are volunteers who have expertise in the area of education that look at these applicants because they want a well-educated Georgia, which is what everybody on this panel wants, which I assume everybody in the audience wants. These are people working for free, simply providing a public service. I'm like you, Senator Loudermilk. I'm against bureaucracy, Representative Coomer. This is not a bureaucracy when you have volunteers willing to serve their state.
Professor?
I'm right now in a very, I guess maybe unique position. I'm on the board of the Georgia Charter Education Foundation, and we have 2 charter schools that were commissioned under the, authorized under the commission that existed for, 3 years. One of our charters is just coming up for recommissioning again. Now, there is no commission. So this whole notion of who's in control, and you've got to have local control, and there's an unelected board that's going to be in control. Well, right now, there is no unelected board, and we are going through our reauthorization. I'm in the very middle of this. And I must say that we are dealing with the Board of Education. Again, there's no commission, so they can't be in control. We're dealing with the Board of Education, and I tell you that they are not trying to take control from us. They are trying to push control to us. They are insisting that we take charge of the governance, and even, we've only been in operation for 2 years, so things are still very young and needing to mature and everything. And I'm right with them that the parents and the community board are learning to take take control themselves. So it's not a shift from, is the state taking control or is somebody else taking, it's the state wants the parents, in this case, to take control and to take responsibility. Because remember, on the other side of this control is accountability, and that's something that the charters have that the other schools really don't so much. So I will tell you from somebody on the ground and on the battle lines on this one, that we are not struggling with the state and trying to take control from them. They are pushing it towards us and strongly encouraging and insisting that we develop ever more refined government structures.
Rich?
Yeah, I just want to add that I know we're in Bartow County, and it's not exactly Metro Atlanta, but it's close enough to be considered the metropolitan area. I grew up in southwest Georgia, and in my home county, a little bit southeast of my home county, there was a school that was started called Watala Charter Academy. And one of the things that they experienced, which I think really gives a real good example of why we need a state commission, is that in order for that school to get started, not only did they get told no one time, they got told no 5 times by 5 different counties that they now pull from. So going back to Senator Rogers' example, you know, they had to ask 5 different McDonald's, could we open up a Burger King? And they all said no. But fortunately, during the period that they were getting started, there was a state charter school commission that they could go and appeal to. As a result, that school was opened, and this past year, it outperformed in nearly every category of reading, math, science, social studies than the 5 districts that told them no just a few short years ago. If we did not have a commission, there would still be several hundred kids in rural South Georgia stuck in a traditional system that was quite comfortable just doing things the way they've done for the last 100 years. That's why I find this constitutional amendment so vitally important, not just to some parts of Georgia, but all across the state.
Tony, we've vetted this pretty well, but I don't think we've answered one of the key accusations that we hear from the video and throughout the community and through different organizations that oppose this amendment. Why do we need the commission? Because, as it was stated, we can already do this. The Department or the Board of Education can already do this. Why do we need a commission?
Well, there's a lot of truth that we can already do. We've been doing it for 10 years, as the representative said. But then the Supreme Court made the decision that stated the one word that was inserted that was created out of nowhere. They said that local school districts have exclusive control over K-12 education. Now, that one word, exclusive, was not there. It's funny, later in the Constitution, it did say that the Board of Regents has exclusive control over colleges and universities in Georgia. So it wasn't that the Founding Fathers didn't know the word exclusive. They just didn't choose to use it about K-12 education. So because of that, it is called into question whether the state of Georgia has a constitutional ability to approve charter schools. And what will cease it would be a lawsuit placed by some school districts who would say to the court, the Supreme Court said that local school districts have exclusive authority in K-12 education, but over here's the state approving charter schools. What do you say? And I'm not an attorney, but I know a lot of attorneys, and they all say the same thing. The court would rule on the basis of the Supreme Court decision and tell the state, you can't approve charter schools. Now, I brought that up in several forums, and the opposition always says, they're school districts. We would never sue. What gives them that idea that we would sue? Well, it's a funny thing. 5 of the school districts got together and sued back in 2008, all the way to 2009, took it all the way to the Georgia Supreme Court. They not only wanted the Georgia Commission, Charter School Commission, declared unconstitutional, they wanted every school that had already been approved, even those that were open, charter schools, I'm talking about kids in these schools, they wanted them all closed. Now, I find it very And here's their strategy. Strategy one is to get this amendment defeated. Case closed, problem solved. Strategy two, if we don't pass the amendment, they're going to then go back to court. They got plenty of lawyers. Talk about for-profit people. I love attorneys. We need you. But I've never had one that gave me free services either. They spend a lot of money. And we had, as an association, by the way, our little charter schools operate on very little money. We paid for their defense. It cost $350,000. $350,000. In my opinion, wasted money, because it should have been spent on the kids, defending our charter schools to keep them open. So I'm not going to believe that they're not going to sue. The day, if the amendment does not pass, the day after or soon after that, they'll file suit asking the court to tell the state you can no longer approve state charter schools.
Thank you. I think that's a very good discussion. We're going to move on to question number 4. And this is, again, I've heard this from many different areas. And we've all heard this number thrown out, that it would cost us, the taxpayers, $430 billion over 5 years to create this bureaucracy that has been called. And that would only result in 7 new charter schools each year. Is it true? $430 billion. Who would like to take a first stab at this? Professor, you're a money person.
I'm a money person. $430 million is a lot of money, but it really isn't that much more than the $370 million that the Atlanta Public School System has wasted on its air conditioning system.
So you're saying we could have operated 7 charter schools, 35 charter schools for 5 years for what that one air conditioner costs?
Something like it.
Over what it should have cost.
But seriously, I think we've argued that there really is no new bureaucracy being created. There are going to be some commissioners that will do this on a volunteer basis. There may be some staff connected with this, and you would know the numbers about what that staff costs, but there's no way it's $430 million. It's questionable where that money came from. And let's just talking about the charter schools and the startup charter schools and what they need from the state. All of the things that they need, because they're following all the same regulations as state schools, the health and safety regulations and so on and so forth, all those basic regulations that are necessary. The state is already doing that anyway. And so the state will not need to hire any additional staff at the Department of Education level. So the money, the $430 million can't be accounted for there. And in addition, every startup charter school takes 3% of its revenues and pays it to the state for the services the state is providing. So the charters are paying their way. So there's no bureaucracy. And in fact, the charters have managed to do this so efficiently that they are able to pay for the state services not with 3%, but with only 2%. Okay? So, but every charter school, off the top of the revenue and out of the EMOs, comes a small fee that goes and pays for the services that they're using from the State Board of Education. So it's actually not costing the taxpayer at all. It's actually saving the taxpayer money, and we can get that into that sort of later on how that's.
Well, the other thing that I would add about this projection, and that's exactly what it is, it's a big assumption that the commission would approve 7 schools each year for 5 years. That's not in law. There's nothing that says that will happen. I'm going to tell you, it's hard to get a charter school approved, whether it's at the local level or at the state or when we had the commission. The commission, many more are turned down than approved. You really have to prove you know what you're doing and you can reach the goals that you've stated. So the first year the commission was in operation, they approved 2 charter schools. So this is a projection. It might be 1. It might be 10 in 1 year and 2 in the next. We don't know that. But it's kind of like, I was told the other day, I had a guy trying to sell me this franchise opportunity, and he said, I believe it's called ACN. Anybody heard of that? You're supposed to be able to get your own website. You can sell them direct TV and radio, all your utilities and all that. He said, you can just get 1,000 of your friends to sign up for this. You will make $10,000 just signing them up. Well, that just sounds wonderful, but that's a bad assumption. I don't have 1,000 friends.
Anybody else on this particular subject?
Again, with just about every argument they made, a simple application of mathematics. Now look, I'm not smart enough to teach at Georgia Tech. That's Dr. Reese. I was smart enough barely to get in. They did teach me a little math there, but let's just follow this one for a second. 1.6 million Georgians go to public school right now. The average student cost, state, local, and federal dollars, is almost $9,000. For the charter school, if this amendment passes, the average cost will be $5,500, rather 62%, about $5,500. So if you have the same 1.6 million kids, now look, the day after this passes, it's not like 100,000 new kids are going to magically appear or disappear. You're going to have the same number of kids. So if you have the same number of kids, and right now they're costing you $9,000, and for every one that goes to the charter school, you save 38%. How does that cost you more? More kids don't magically show up or disappear. All you'll have is that pie, and a portion of it will go to a lower cost system. So again, by applying this basic math, you can tell not only is this not going to cost you money as a taxpayer, it's going to save you money as a taxpayer.
Well, that kind of segues into that next question, which is it's been stated that these charter schools, the students cost about $2,000, or they would get $2,000 more than the traditional schools. And that would reduce the available funding for traditional schools by millions, as well as take needed funds directly out of traditional schools at the local level. So, who would like to start off?
Let me pick up on that one too. That argument is only a partial argument, as you would expect. Just imagine a school system and one kid is going to leave and go to a charter school. So the funding, that is the state portion of the funding only, no local property tax money at all. The funding for that child is going to go with that child to the new charter school. That's true. So that system, the regular system, and those kids are going to be have that much less funding to operate their school. Now, the opponents to this are going to say, well, we've got all these school buildings sitting vacant. And that's really a fixed and variable cost argument. So what you have to do is you have to say, well, if the kid goes, what it was going to cost to educate that particular kid goes too. So the school district loses the revenue that they were getting from the state, but they also don't have to spend the additional money that would have cost to educate that child. So the question is, which is larger? They're losing the money, but they're also losing the costs. Well, I happen to have done a study with two fabulously brilliant Georgia Tech students that looks at this information school district by school district for all 180 school districts. And it turns out that 88% of our kids are being educated in districts where their district will actually be better off financially. All the kids that stay in the regular school will be better off financially at about an average of $1,000. So that a kid, for 88% of our students, if one of their fellow colleagues decides that they're going to go to a charter school, some funding, which I understand it's funded at the lowest, the funding is at the lowest 5 schools. Lowest 4% of the 4 school districts. So the funding is low already. So the funding does leave the school system, and that's what they're squealing, I shouldn't use that word, squealing about. So the funding does leave that school district, but their costs also fall. So using their own numbers and their own accounts and absolutely standard uniform research procedures, it turns out that they're $1,000 better off. They're going to have an extra $1,000 to spend on the kids that remain. For the Atlanta Public Schools, that number is $4,300. For a number of districts, it's like $2,200. So when we're all talking about this amendment in a number of places, and one of my friends said to me, the people who are going to vote on this, a lot of people have been told by their school district that if the charter schools are going to suck money out of the regular school system, and your kid is going to lose their band program, or your kid is going to lose their athletic program. And that is absolutely demonstrably false. because there's going to actually be an extra $1,000 or $4,000 to put in that athletic program and to put into that, the band or whatever. So,
Rich, using what we just heard here, you gave the story of the charter school that arose out of 5 different systems. What was their experience? Did Armageddon happen within those 5 school systems, and they had to close the schools and the band programs went away? And what was the result there?
Those school systems are still open and they're functioning, and for the parents who are comfortable or satisfied with the level of service that those school districts are providing, their kids are still there. But for those parents who wanted something a little bit extra, they've had the opportunity now to be a part of a public charter school that provides them at a higher level of academic performance. And I also want to point out, too, that when the argument is made that somehow or another that money is going to leave these school districts and all these services are not going to be able to be provided in the traditional sector, I would like to point out that I have a daughter who attends 2 public charter schools who started out with about a 25% deficit when you looked at the actual amount of revenue, as Dr. Reese alluded to. They started out, $4,000 plus in the hole compared to what a traditional school would get in funding. But they have an outstanding band program at Drew Charter School. Matter of fact, they have an orchestra. They also have a golf program, where they had a public-private partnership with the Charlie East Golf Course, and my 2nd grader has a rotating PE class. Well, she goes and she learns how to get her a putting game and a short game. She works on that in the 2nd grade. I can also tell you about Kip, who my oldest daughter attends. Well, they're operating on less funding again, but yet we were able to have a state-ranked debate team. We were able to have a division champion soccer team. And oh, by the way, we didn't have a gym. We just had this old field that we converted from the back of a church that was next door. That's what they practice in. All right? So we were still able to provide all of these things of sports, music, and other things like debate and art and choir. We did all of that over the last 4 years at my daughter's 2 schools with less money than the current district says that they can't deal with losing in the event that this amendment would pass.
Professor.
I picked up something while you were talking. You said we did this, we did that. One of the things that's really the most exciting about charter schools, and we all know this is really important in educational outcomes, is the parent involvement. If the kid is in the charter school, the parents have to be involved. And so you'll see, in fact, you may know the answer to this, of your orchestra and your debate club, and I've been on boards of other schools where there are like robotic societies and all that. There's always a parent that just picks it up and drives it and runs with it, and you see the kind of excitement and parent involvement that you just don't see in a big, huge school district where the parent would have to go through all kinds of layers of bureaucracy to even get anything through. So has that been the case?
You're absolutely correct. There always was a teacher that sponsored the activity, but by and large, it was at least 2 or 3 other parents that helped carry that load and provide some of the extra leadership for their organization.
I know that there's people here that work in the legislature. You can fact check me on this, but I think I've heard Representative Jan Jones from my district where I live over in Fulton County make this statement, that even if the figure of $430 million were true, that is 0.016% of the state budget. Did I get that right? I believe it's less than 1%.
That's what she says. She says 2%. She
2%?
She rounds it up.
But she rounds it up, 2%. Now, the school districts say, but we could have had that money. They're taking our money. Well, if you go with that analogy, if you go with that, what they're really saying is they own 100% of the budget. So we can't have Medicaid, we can't buy police cars, we can't clean up the sidewalks, we can't mow the grounds, we can't keep the rest stops open, nothing, because that takes money away from the public schools. That's ridiculous. And the impact that the school districts say they're going to experience because charter school is overblown. And I don't want to put Senator Rogers on the spot, but I'll let him fact check me on this too. There is a new charter school in Cherokee County. And before it was open, you know, it was being said by the opponents, this is going to cause a lot of teachers to lose their jobs. A lot of teachers. How many kids are in the Cherokee Charter School now? You got 1,000?
1,000.
1,000. Did you hear about a whole lot of teachers losing their jobs up there?
They have more teachers today than they did when the school opened.
That's what I read in the paper.
That's not a good source, but the fact is they have more.
Well, the point is, they said that was going to happen. That was the fear mongering that was put out there. And it did not happen. And I'm hearing, you wouldn't believe what we're hearing, you know, that are Washington State. Over around Augusta, the school superintendent came to a Save Our Schools rally, you know, not Save Our Children, Save Our Schools rally. And he made the comment in a loud voice, the day this amendment passes, our school system will lose $10 million. That was a big, his nose got that long. I'm telling you, that was the biggest lie. You don't lose a dime unless a student decides to leave one of your schools and go to another school. The funding goes with that child. It's the same as if they move to a different county or they move to Alabama or Kentucky. They're not going to get money from the state for students they don't serve. But this is something they don't tell you because it works against their case, as Dr. Reeves has already started indicating. The state charter schools get absolutely no local millage or local tax base. The school systems keep every penny of that unless they get honest and say, now folks, got this charter school, they take 1,000 kids, you know, we don't have to have that money more, we're going to give you that back. When that happens, let me know.
I just want to follow up on that point too. You used the word fear-mongering, and when Senator Loudermilk and I were in a panel earlier, I said the last time we saw fear-mongering like this in Georgia was when Zell Miller was trying to pass the lottery system in Georgia. And we heard about all the terrible things that were happening then. And again, you know, we've heard this week that passage of the charter schools will allow the Chinese government to come in and take over Georgia public education. I've heard that it will allow Saudi oil companies to come in and take over Georgia education. I've heard that it will allow the United Nations to take over Georgia public education if we pass this charter amendment. Again, if you just take away the smoke of the vitriol and you look at the bare facts and you look at not what might happen. You know, if we were, it's like two candidates who've never been elected to office fighting over what one will do and what the other will do. Well, you know, voters kind of have to figure that out. But in a case where you have an incumbent running against some are being challenged, you can look at the incumbent's record and decide, well, in this case, charter schools are the incumbent. We've seen what they do. We saw what they did in Cherokee. We've seen what they do all across the state. It's good results. It's good policy. And in reality, there will be changes in public education. But I don't know anybody who thinks that Georgia public education doesn't need improvement. The question is, how do we get there? And if you look at the history in the last 30 years, we've spent money, you know, the rate of spending per student has gone through the roof while results continue to be in decline. So it's not just a matter of throwing more money at the problem. That's not going to fix it. We've seen that doesn't work. What fixes it is tailoring education to the needs of individual students, and that's what charter schools allow. And I want just one last thing before I move on while I'm thinking of this, because it's been a long day and I'm tired, I might forget. You know, I had this discussion with a Gordon County elected official last week, and he said, you know, what we're afraid of is that if we get a charter school that's denied by the city school board or the county school board and they get approved at the state level, they're going to siphon off all of the good students, leave the poor performing students in the traditional public school system, and all of us are going to have to carry the slack for those poor performing students. I started the response by asking this question: how many charter applications has the city of Calhoun denied in its existence? None, I guess. Well, that's because the parents in Calhoun are satisfied with their school. There's not going to be a rush to create new charters in places like Bartow County and Cartersville City and Rome City, where we've got good performing schools. This is to give a chance, an opportunity, a hope, a little glimmer of possibility for kids who are stuck in those systems that just won't do what they're required to do. And it is an economic development issue. That's another argument for another time. I'll stop there.
I'm going to use my restaurant analogy again. If you like Big Macs, you're not going to go to Burger King. You're going to keep going to McDonald's, right? And if you like Whoppers, you're going to go to Burger King, and you're not going to go to McDonald's. I mean, their whole logic, as with just about everything that they throw against the wall, is completely backwards. It's not the students who are doing exceptionally well that are going to wake up one day and say, wow, we're doing great at this school. Let me go to a different one. That's not going to happen. It's the kids that are doing poor that are going to say, this isn't working for me. Let me go to another one. I mean, it's almost like they take the most logical view and spin it 180 degrees and then they try to apply that. But let me just say, the two biggest lies in this whole argument surround money. First, we're going to start with this idea about the money and them losing money, okay? I want you to think about this. Today, there are thousands of students that go to school in Bartow County. Undoubtedly, over the Christmas break, there'll be a few of them that move. And let's just assume for a moment a few of them move to my home county of Cherokee County, right? Let's assume 10 kids move. The next time they have the FTE count, those 10 kids are going to show up in Cherokee County's counts, right? The state is going to take the money they were using and sending to Bartow County. They're going to say, wait a minute, those 10 kids are now in Cherokee County. We're going to send the money to Cherokee County, as they should, right? Have you ever heard a school superintendent say, you know, it is just totally unfair that those children left to go to another public school system and that their money followed them. The money for those 10 kids should stay in Bartow County even though they're being educated in Cherokee County. Has any superintendent ever made that argument?
You've given them a good idea, they might.
But that is the exact argument they're making with public charter schools. They're saying, if a child leaves my public school system and goes to another public school system, I should be allowed to keep the money for that student, and it shouldn't follow, the state money should not follow that student. So that's big lie number one. Big lie number two actually frustrates me more, and it probably does Christian and Barry. And for those who follow this, and I don't want to get too deep into the politics of this, but you ought to be mad when people behave this way. When we introduced this legislation, the public schools, traditional public schools came to us and they said, we're totally opposed to it because you're going to use local money. Isn't that what they said? And what they said was, if you will just not use local money, then we're fine with it. So what did we say? Well, it's going to be real tough on the charter kids, but all right, we'll take the local money out of it. Even though I think that's fundamentally wrong. I think if I'm paying property taxes to my county, money ought to follow to the school of their choice. But we said, okay, we'll take the local money out of it. Now, after doing that, they're coming back and saying, well, you're going to give them a little more state money than the regular kids. Now think about that logically. These are the same people that come to us and tell us that $9,000 is not sufficient enough money. Then they say we don't want you to use the local money for those kids, and we agree with them. And then they say, well, now you're going to give them more state money. So the $9,000 is not enough, but the $5,500 is too much for the charter kids? Follow that logic there. What are they saying about those kids? Honestly, I mean, it really boils down to that. What are they saying about those kids? If you come to our system, you should get $9,000 and a whole lot more. But if you go to that system over there, you shouldn't even be allowed to have $5,500. I just don't want to live in a state where I have government bureaucrats picking and choosing the kids and saying, this one's good enough to give $9,000 to, this one, just forget about it. We don't even want them to have $5,500. The level of hatred that must go into that, it's really sad that people behave in this way. I mean, they're all of our kids. These kids are Georgia kids. We want them to get a good education. Why would we sit around and pick and choose and say, this one is worthy because they decided to stay in our system, but this one is not worthy because they dared to leave the system? It's really, if you think about the core of their argument, it's pretty sick that they would want to pick and choose and punish children simply because the parents want to make a better choice for that child's education.
Senator, while you're on that subject and you've been making some local analogies, in Bartow County we have two school systems, Bartow County and City of Cartersville. what happens when a child leaves this county system and moves to the city, or vice versa right now, predominantly with the FDE money?
Well, the state money follows the child. You can't really have it any other way, but you can even take that down to the local level. All right, let's take Cass Middle School, and then we'll say Woodland High School. I'm going to assume for a moment there are far more students at Woodland High School than there are at Cass Middle School. The local system itself is not going to send the same dollars to Cass Middle School as they do to Woodland High School because there's more students there. So they acknowledge you fund education on a per student basis. You send more money to schools with larger student populations, you send less to schools with less student populations. So that's already acknowledged in the way that we fund education. Again, it's the state. The state's interest is not whether a child goes to Cartersville or Bartow County. The state's interest is to say, we're paying half the cost, and whatever public school that child is going to, that's where we're going to send the money. But again, it goes back to my point about them being disingenuous. You've never heard them argue that when the child goes from Bartow's system to Cartersville, that the money shouldn't follow the child. But if a child dare go from public school system A to public school system B, and that happens to be a public charter school, then it's like all hell's going to break loose. We don't want that money following the child. It's just so disingenuous.
Tony, then I'm going to come back to you with a follow-up real quick.
If I just may add, and what the school district superintendents will say, and some elected board members, is, well, we have fixed costs. I think you referred to that a minute ago. And, you just heard Drew Charter School down in Atlanta is one of the best charter schools in the country. And they're doing such a great job, and the kids are all kids from an area where, the euphemism is a lot of them are eligible for free and reduced lunch. When I grew up, it was called poor. I was poor. These are kids, that deserve better options in education, okay? So they only have an elementary school, and they decided, okay, our kids are having to leave our school, elementary and middle, and now where are they going to high school? They're having to go back to high schools, some of them that are not that good. So they applied to Atlanta Public Schools. We'd like to expand and have high school. Doesn't everybody love Drew High School, Drew Charter School? Absolutely. Everybody loves Drew Charter School. Nobody in APS says Drew Charter School is a bad charter school. They brag about it. It's great. But when they asked them, can we now start a high school, the answer that came back immediately was no. And the superintendent, acting superintendent, whatever he is, said, as long as there are any empty chairs in our other schools, we will not approve any charter schools. So the problem is bad management. What we found since then is that Atlanta Public School way overbuilt schools, way overbuilt. Then they've had to start closing them. Go back to the McDonald's analogy. Let's say McDonald's says, well, before the Burger King was here, we had 500 seats. Now that Burger King has come, about half our students are gone, so we should have support from somewhere to continue keeping our building going, even though we don't have the students anymore, or the customers anymore. I don't do very well with analogies, but did that make sense to you? Okay, good.
Senator, we've got a good discussion going, and we've had some questions for the audience that kind of fit into the discussion we're having right now, so I want to incorporate one of those as we're discussing the money. Representative Coomer mentioned the Cherokee Charter Academy. One of the questions is, when a student leaves the Cherokee Public School and he goes to the Cherokee Charter Academy, how much money actually goes with that child, and how much stays with the Cherokee County school system?
Well, for that parent, and I live in Cherokee County, and my children don't go to Cherokee County Public Schools, they don't go to Cherokee Charter School. I'm paying for somebody else's child to be educated, which is fine. We all understand that as a society, an educated society is a lot less expensive than an uneducated society. That's what we're willing to, even if we don't have children in the system, pay. But if my kid is going to the system, I would at least want my money to follow my child from one public school to the next public school. But in Cherokee County right now, and somebody, if anybody's from Cherokee Charter, you may know these numbers better, but I believe the number is $4,200. They're operating on $4,200 per student. The average student in the regular system is getting about $8,800 per student. So they're less than 50%. And by the way, their test scores came out, and they outperformed the surrounding schools in 3 of the 5 subject matters. So they're, again, going back to what I talked about earlier, better results, half the cost, which kind of calls into question all of these claims that we in the legislature get about, the $9,000 per student. How can we possibly survive on that? And you start scratching your head. Now, wait a minute. If you can't survive on $9,000, but these guys over here are doing it for $4,200, where's the disconnect? Something's going wrong. But yeah, they're performing quite well. Now, they can't survive long term on that amount of money because, frankly, the operator is taking a loss. But they can certainly survive on 70%.
Rich, we've heard, and I've heard this, I know that Representative Coomer heard this recently, and it's going out throughout. I've even spoke at another event that this was brought up. Regarding the selection process for children that go to charter schools, we've been told charter schools are only for the elitists, the wealthy, that want to get their kids out of these failing school systems, and it's set up by the Republicans to just benefit the wealthier. My understanding is that it's totally random, and that minorities are some of the strongest supporters of the charter schools. Can you address the selection process as far as how schools or children are selected to get out of a failing public school or any school to go to a charter school?
The selection process is simply this: parental choice. Parents make a decision that they want to take their child somewhere differently. There's only so many seats that a charter school has. Could be 300, could be 400, could be 500 seats. As many people that would like to fill out the paperwork to have their kid enrolled at that public charter school, there's not going to be anyone standing there saying, no, not you, no, we can take you, and we can take you, but no, not you. Whosoever will, let them come. The public charter school will receive their application, process that application, and open their arms to that student who wants to step it up a notch for that learning environment. It is so disingenuous for people to make an argument that charter schools cherry pick or we discriminate, or there's this special little formula that you have to figure out in order to go to that school. I made a choice to put my daughter into school because it had a culture of high expectation. And the funny thing about it all is, I left a school building that was probably at the time, maybe 5 years old, brand spanking new building, had about 30 or so brand new, maybe about 20-inch Mac screens at the time. I mean, just loaded, bursting with technology. But the school was failing kids. So we made a choice to leave the brand new shiny school and move into one of the oldest buildings in the city of Atlanta, named after Joel Chandler Harris. Probably some of y'all read his book when you were kids. We moved into an old building in a not so stellar part of town, and people came from all over because that school opened its arms to whoever wanted to come there that bought into the vision. Bought into the vision, we're going to do things differently, we're going to set high expectations, we're going to hold the kids accountable. Both my daughters have schools that have populations that are slightly above average when it comes to free and reduced lunch kids. That just happens to be that way. My wife and I, we chose to send our kids where they could be educated the way we want them to be educated. We didn't really care how much money the parents and the other parents may make or where the kid may live. For us, when we walk in the door and we wear our uniforms and we have our crest on our chest, it's about that family and what that family of students is going to do to make life better for their future. And I just really wish that we could stick to the argument of doing what's best for kids and not politicking and trying to twist the argument around in the minds of parents.
I want to share with you some academic evidence and studies that actually has an emotional kick. And the saddest thing about all of that is when you take us a little school that could, and put it in a situation like that, what do you think actually happens to all the surrounding regular public schools? They all get better. And all academic studies show this. The charter school movement is sweeping the country because of this very fact. You take an exciting, energetic, parents, kids, faculty, you plunk it in the middle of an environment that's failing, and all of a sudden everybody else starts getting excited. So this one little school that's running at 30 to 40% less cost than the existing schools, is doing better than the existing schools, and it also manages, by example, to pull off all the other schools. And this, again, is across the country. We know that this happens. And if you think about it, it shouldn't surprise you. It would be the natural thing that would happen.
Free market forces at work.
Tony, I know you got a comment. Let me throw this in there and you can answer that as well.
Sure.
Because one of the questions was, what happens to the kids that don't get selected to go to the charter school that are left behind? It sounds like maybe they're going to benefit as well.
Thank you. That is exactly what I was going to address. Rich had a very good situation in that there were open seats in the charter school. How many of you have seen the movie Won't Back Down? If you haven't, it's a great movie because it really tells you how it is in the United States. If your children are not doing well in the traditional public school and you don't have the money for a private school, what do? Well, in the movie, the lady tried to get her daughter in a charter school. If you remember, though, there are just so many seats in the charter school. So how did they choose the students? That's the law. The way they chose the students in that movie is the law. You have to have a lottery. If there are more kids than seats, you have a lottery. And I've been in schools where these lotteries have been conducted, and when the kids come in to put their names in the pot, there are no identifiers. In other words, they don't know what race they are, they don't know what their grades were, they don't know anything. So it's totally a blind lottery until someone pulls out that number and says, oh, that's 35, and then someone over here says, oh, 35, that's June Allen, you know. So it's very sad that this little girl wasn't chosen. So they tried to do something that's called a parent trigger. That's a different story. But here, it's really sad. We've got a waiting list of 5,000 kids just for our state so-called special charter schools that are in question here. These are people whose parent really wants something better for their children, but they can't get in the charter school because there are no seats, no room available. Is that the question you were asking, or are you asking?
Well, part of it was, what happens to the kids that don't get selected and left behind? Are they just left in poor performing schools? But what the professor was saying, it sounds like that has actually helped improve the education in those public schools.
It does, and it's a long-term process. It's the reason, people that are opposing charter schools will say, well, if you can't improve education for every single child, then you shouldn't do it. Why should you just help that little group of children? But what they're not thinking is the influence. I think I can go back to your analogy now. If McDonald's notices all their customers are going to Burger King, they're going to say, what's wrong with our hamburgers? Why is no one buying our hamburgers anymore? Why are they going over there? And this is happening in other states. Now, a lot of other states have a lot more charter schools than we do. And they've had them a lot longer. And what they've seen is exactly what Dr. Reeves has said. It raises the bar. Because as schools see, hey, our parents are not happy. Children are leaving. What do we need to do? Then they do the self-study. And then they do a strategic plan. And they decide, what can we do to have a better school? And sometimes that's what motivates them to become a conversion charter school. Sometimes that's what makes them have a charter system. And this is really an ironic thing to me, that there are a lot of people in charter systems that are against the charter amendment. Who would have thunk it? You would think, oh, they love charter school. No, they don't. But they owe their existence to the little mom and pop charter school that could. And they saw how those schools were operating. They said, man, there's something to this. We need to try to improve our schools in the same way. And I think that's a beautiful thing. I'm not against the charter system. I think that's wonderful. I just think it's funny that they don't really want more charter schools.
Senator, forgive me, but I always end up answering things kind of personally, but that's just how this whole process is for me. When my daughter attended a traditional public school, there was about 22 kids that were in her fourth grade class before she went her fifth grade year to our public charter school. So there was 22 kids in that class, and they received at that time in the neighborhood of about $14,000 per pupil in the Atlanta public school system. So she had 22 kids. They were getting somewhere between $14,000, a little bit over $14,000 at that particular time at her public school. She left that class, went to a public charter school where we actually had 30 kids per class. Her first year, there was 90 students that started KIPP Strive Academy. It started with 90 students in 3 classes. That's 30 kids per class. Now, I call them the educrats, the folks who are supposed to be really, really good at education. They've said time and time again that if you have a smaller classroom, you're going to get better results. Now, here's an example. Well, my daughter leaving that traditional school made the classroom small, assuming nobody else came, okay? So let's just go with that assumption. Assuming no one else came, the class got small. So it's less responsibility on the teacher. She could have more time to focus on some other kids who may be a little bit more needed. I find it hard for people to make this crazy argument that somehow the kids that are left behind are going to be left behind. Using what they have said time and time again, this is the opposition, using the same that they've said time and time again, it actually begins to work in their favor. You get a smaller class, and you get more money. So if you break it down, it should be a win-win scenario for everyone. Now, I will tell you this. Their facts are a little flawed because it's been proven time and time again that class size really doesn't matter a whole lot. It's about having a quality teacher, setting high standards. That's my case for why the kids who are still in the charter school, still in traditional school, they're going to be just as fine or better off because of a reallocation of resources. If adults do the right thing in the best interest of the kids, those kids are going to have more time from their teacher, and they're going to have more excess dollars that can be invested in them to do additional services.
And in Atlanta, that number is $4,321. That's how much they were better off than your daughters out.
You had a comment, then I want to transition to the next question after this.
Right, I just wanted to follow up on this idea of other schools in the community improving when state charter commission schools come in, because if you take that out a step further to a macro level, what happens is community schools get better, the system schools get better, and then we reach ultimately what is our goal as state legislators, the state's reputation, performance, system gets better. That's important not just for the educational opportunities of those children, but for the economic opportunities of those children and their families and the state, because when companies look to expand or they look to invest in a certain place, they want to build a plant somewhere, they're not the first thing they're going to do. One of the things they're going to do is figure out what the education is like in that location. They don't look at the beginning, they don't look at Rome City Schools and say, well, Rome City Schools are good, but maybe DeKalb County schools aren't good, so let's put our plant up in Rome and not down in DeKalb. What they look at instead is the 30,000-foot view. What do we know about Georgia education? Low scores, high dropout rates, cheating scandals, accreditation problems. Let's move on to, dare I say it, Alabama. Let's move on somewhere else that doesn't have those problems. So it is a real economic development issue. It's a branding issue, if you will. Better education across the state means better economic development, better competition in this state with our neighbors.
Senator Rogers, we've been talking as if charter schools outperform traditional public schools, but the Georgia Department of Education came out with a report stating that charter schools perform no better than the traditional public schools. Can you address that?
I will, but the premise of that question is that somehow that the government is a better predictor or a better assessor of what's good for individual children than the actual parents. Because I operate on the notion that a parent knows what's better for their individual child than the government. And I hope everyone would agree with that. So if a parent chooses school A over school B, I don't care if the government says school A is better than school B. I'm going to trust that the parent made the right decision for their individual child. I want to get to the test scores in a minute, but this really goes to the heart of school choice, because we will hear this argument time and time again. What they'll say is, well, we have good schools, so we don't need this. Number one, if you truly believe that, then why are you worried about it? Because no one will leave your school, right? So, if you have really good schools, you can put 29 charters around your really good school, and no one will leave your really good school. So if you actually believe that, you shouldn't worry about this. But the second thing is, let's take Cartersville High School, which is a pretty good school, it has decent test scores. I could go to Cartersville High School right now today and find you 100 kids. Well, that's a rather small school. I'll find you 50 kids that are on the verge of dropping out. Does that mean that Cartersville High School is a bad school? No, it doesn't mean that. It just means that Cartersville High School doesn't work for those 50 kids. So instead of having a system that says, you must go to Cartersville High School, it's a great school, if it's not working for you, too bad, why don't we have a system that says, you can go to Cartersville High School, but if it's not working for you, you can go to a different school. And then we've solved the problem for everybody. And I trust the parents are going to make that decision better than the government, who, by the way, our current system, by the way, again, is sending children to school based on the United States postal mailing addresses. That's how we do it now, which is lunacy. But the second, the heart of your question was test scores. Now, what they're doing is they're comparing, to use the bad analogy, apples to oranges. Most of the schools in the state of Georgia that are considered charter schools are schools that are created by the local district. So think about this for a second. Is the local district going to take their very best school and turn that into a charter school? Or are they going to take their very worst school and turn it into a charter school? Or they're not going to take the very best school because that school is already performing. They're going to take the worst schools, and that's what you've seen around the state. These conversion charter schools are typically schools that have not been performing well. Chamblee High School was dismal. I don't even know why it was still open. They turned that into a magnet charter conversion, whatever they want to call it, and now it's a good school, it's got a specific purpose. So you can't take a school that is doing very poor, which probably has some serious problems with demographic, socioeconomic factors, high poverty rates, a lot of single-parent families, and then take the results of that school and compare it to the rest of the state and think that's an apt comparison, because it's not. A better way to look at this are to take the schools, particularly the state startup charter schools, and compare them to the school systems from which they draw. In other words, let's take Ivy Prep in Gwinnett County and compare it to all the schools from where it drew its children. That's a fair comparison, right? If you do that, and you look at those comparisons, you will find that the state chartered independent schools are significantly better than the schools from where the children came from, which is a proper comparison between the two. So if you use their numbers the right way, they'll prove our case. But at the end of the day, I'm not worried about some government comparison. I'm worried about a parent determining whether school A or school B works better for their child.
Rich, let me add one of the questions from the audience as we're on this discussion about performance. Are the education management companies paid by performance? In other words, if they don't perform, then they lose their contract, is understand. And if that's the case, and maybe Tony may want to answer this, are they likely to kick out the children that are poor performers?
Well, to answer your question, the education management company, yes, is paid by performance. If you're not serving the board, then you will get fired. And it's a very quick process. The board is in charge of the operations of the school. They contract their services to the management company to perform certain tasks. If the board decides those tasks are not being performed, then the board can make the decision to replace that management company with another. With regard to the kids, they're not in the position, that's not the role of the management company to screen kids. It is the role of the management company to serve the kids that the board has given the direction to serve. That is how the process is done.
We've seen charter schools that were not doing very well, and you've got to always remember, when we talk about a management company, they are contractors. They don't own the school. The people of Georgia own the schools. They're public schools, and they have an independent board of people like Christine on the board to oversee it, and they're responsible to make sure that everybody in the school, whether it's the management company or the principal or anybody else, does their job. So I've seen several cases where management companies were fired because they didn't do the things that they needed to do for the students to succeed. And that must be a scary thing for some traditional public school districts. How would you like that, you know? You bring in the superintendent and you say, you know, our board at our school has decided we're not doing very well, so you are fired. and we're going to get somebody who can help us. That's a scary thought. It's accountability. And people that say, well, it's taking away local control. There is no greater local control than what we've been talking about.
And I just want to add that those decisions to fire the management company were parent-driven. The parents made it clear to the boards, because I have a neighbor and close personal friend who happened to be a member of one of those school staffs. And it was the parents that were coming, telling the board members that we need to talk, because this is what's happening, and I'm not satisfied. So the whole charter school movement is about giving power to parents. And I don't want, just like Senator Rogers said, I don't want any bureaucrat, some government employee telling me what's best for my child. I and my neighbors know that way better than anybody in this state.
Dr. Reese, the next question, it's been stated that taxpayer dollars are going to get sent out of the state, I guess, to these management companies, and that 96% of the funds for the pro-amendment campaign have come from out-of-state companies. Do you have any knowledge in this or any of the other panelists?
Well, I actually want to put that over to Tony, because he's really been in charge of that.
I do have knowledge of that. There's been what did Mark Twain say when he woke up, read his obituary? The reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated. And this is a place that has been greatly exaggerated. One of our management companies, as a for instance, and I know this very well because we just had a reporter from New York City down here who's doing a report about all this, and she called me and she said, there's this management company that we've been told has given the bulk of the money to try to get the amendment approved. I said, well, what management company is that? And she named the company, and I said, well, I'm not running the campaign, but it's public knowledge who has given, and I'm going to look at it. Well, that company had given $50,000. Again, I'm not running the campaign, but I have seen the budget, and this was leaked to the press. I told some schools about this, so this is not a private thing. The budget for the campaign was about $1.8 million. Now you do the math. $50,000 out of $1.8 million. Did they pay the bulk of that? Now the other argument is, well, there are people out of state. The most of the money that came from out of state were people who had nothing to do with working or profiting from charter schools. They are philanthropists. Philanthropists. And so I made this point. One of the contributors, and this is available for public records, and they print it in the paper, by the way. They'll be printing another statement pretty soon about who gave to the for and against the campaign. One of the contributors has been a lady, Alice Walton. I don't know if you know the Waltons or not. Walmart. I think she's contributed about $600,000, and boy, has she been criticized. You know, she's been called everything but thank you. You know, why would someone from out of state be doing this? And the AJC calls me up all the time, and of course, you know, they won't print what I say. But I said to them when they made that criticism, well, isn't that bad that these out-of-state people are doing this? I said, well, you know, it's hard for us to believe this, but it's true. There are people who care about all the kids in the nation. They're not just thinking about me and mine. And these organizations form that are called foundations, and they give across state lines. And I said, all those people in education that are saying it's a bad thing that people like Alice Walton believe she can make a difference, they're the ones that should say, like to Atlanta Public Schools, who receive millions of dollars from Bill Gates. I don't think he lives in Georgia, does he? They receive millions of dollars from Bill Gates. Did anybody raise a stink about that? Oh, it's terrible. They should not be accepting Bill Gates' money for the school. And Gwinnett County, one of the districts that is most fervently against this amendment, they've received a lot of grant money, and one of the most recent ones was from the Broad Foundation. Is the Broad Foundation in Georgia? No. It's funny to me that it's all right to take this money from out of state as long as it meets your own purpose. I think that's a non-argument. We ought to be grateful that there are people in the United States that want to help no matter where they can help. What's Alice Walton going to gain from this? She's a billionaire. Is this going to make her money? She needs no money. So I think that argument is just ridiculous.
Senator?
First, it's actually a little bit scary because what they're essentially saying is that the First Amendment of the Constitution ought not apply if someone's going to say something you don't like. I mean, really think about it. That's what they're saying. But let's take that one step further, because if there's an investigation that our friends at the New York Times, and I talked to her today too, in an interview I'm sure she won't soon forget, if the New York Times or the AJC or any of these other wonderful news agencies want to do some serious reporting, why aren't they asking the question of why did the fundraiser by the opposition fundraiser, it listed all the people who gave money to it. Why on that list was included the Georgia School Superintendents Association and the Georgia School Board Association, among with other organizations like that? You may just say to yourself, now wait a minute, why is that a problem? Well, where do you think they get their money? They don't get their money like Walmart does behind us by selling a good or product that you willingly purchase. They get their money by taking it from you through force, through taxation. I've got a much larger problem with a government using money that it extracted from you against your will to support their own cause than I do a private citizen, in this case Mrs. Walton or anybody else, using the money they earned in the free market to support their cause. Where's the investigation into the Georgia School Boards Association, the Georgia School Superintendents Association, from using taxpayer dollars to engage in this political process, which, by the way, the Attorney General of the state of Georgia said you cannot do?
Senator, we'll lead off with the legislators here, and we're running short on time, but I think we can get through the last questions here. We all get pigeonholed because of certain types of legislation we champion. Yours was Senate Bill 529, I believe it was. Many years ago, you championed immigration reform in the state. You were in the Senate, I was in the House when that happened. So there's been no stronger proponent of ensuring that public dollars are only spent on legal citizens or those who are here illegally. Can you address the accusation that's been made that the charter schools are simply avenues for foreign investment in trade for visas and green cards? Now, if at surface level, I don't see you supporting a piece of legislation that's just going to be an avenue for people to come in and buy their way to legally be in this country.
You know, there are some things that I don't want to shirk the question, but there are some things you just don't waste a lot of time on. I mean, this is another one of those just, if you can't argue the facts, just come up with something so wildly crazy that no one can even begin to wrap their mind around it. I mean, Christian brought it up, all the things you heard in just the last week of the Chinese are taking over these schools. You guys are involved. Do Chinese own your school? I mean, we could go through this time and time again, but I think once you get to that point, I think hopefully all reasonable people will say, okay, they have now lost the argument if they're up to making these accusations. Look, I'll close with this because it has been a long evening, and I know so many of you have stood with us, and I really, really appreciate this. This stuff's extremely important. By the way, last time I checked, all 5 of us live here in Georgia. You know, we are Georgia citizens. We're not out-of-state plants that came in to support this thing. And I want to say something too quickly about my school. I send my children to a private Christian school, that's my choice. And I have to pay double because I pay my local taxes, of course, a lot of them. And here's what's interesting. And I sometimes wish that we really had this attitude, and I don't know if it's just because it comes from without getting too religious here, a biblical understanding of what we're supposed to do as citizens. But I went and sat down at the beginning of this year with with the guy that runs our school, and we have a little over 400 students at our school. My 4 kids are part of that. And we were talking about what it's going to cost for tuition. And he said, you know, the Cherokee Charter School has taken away, as a percentage basis, more students from us than it has in public school. Because you see, there are some parents who didn't want to put their kids in the traditional public school. They were paying pretty high tuition, and now they get to send their kids to the public charter school. He said, we've lost more kids because of that, and tuition is going up at our school. So it's directly impacting our school, me, who's having to pay more tuition, my kids, right? But The headmaster at our school looked at me and said, but you know what? You're doing the right thing, and I don't hold it against you. Even though it's hurting us, you're doing the right thing because it's about the kids and about the choices that are best for them and their parents. And I thought, wouldn't that be amazing if everybody in education had that same attitude, not about protecting your own little kingdom, not about protecting your own little monopoly, but actually sat down and said, you know what? Even if it hurts me, if it's better for the kids, I think it's the right thing to do. Imagine what we could accomplish in this state if instead of adults fighting adults over the government scraps that are on that table, if everybody said, you know what, I'm going to take a step back. And even if I don't get quite as much, as long as I know it's helping the children of Georgia, I'm willing to do it. That's what this amendment is about. That's what it's truly about. Ask yourself 3 questions. Because if you can answer these questions the right way, then your decision on November 6th will be very, very simple. Number 1, who's better at determining what's best for your child? You or the government? Number 2, which system works better? A free market system, where the person supplying a good or service has to meet the demands of the customer, or a government plan system? Government plan system where they tell you exactly what you get. And the third question I ought to ask yourself is, where do we want to be in 20 years? Where do we as a state want to be in 20 years? Do we want to have a system where every student in Georgia has the opportunity to match their interests, their abilities, their vocation with an education delivery system that fits them individually? Or do we want to be exactly where we are today and not make any changes? If you can answer those 3 simple questions, and I'm not telling you how to answer them, I think you can figure that out, you'll know what to do on November 6th. This is not a difficult ballot question whatsoever. This is fairly simple, fairly fundamental, fairly American. I obviously am going to vote yes and urge everybody to vote yes, and no one's paying me to do that. Because I think it's good for the citizens of Georgia, it's good for the kids and the opportunities that they don't have today.
Representative Coomer, closing comments, and if you could, maybe address, how's the state going to pay for the charter schools? We're already looking at tight budgets and maybe a $250 million shortfall.
Well, we've already talked about the fact that we can do more with less in charter schools, and frankly, don't intend to beat a dead horse, but I think that the proof is in the pudding. We've seen it happen year after year. We're continuing to see it happen, and this is a system that we need to keep and reaffirm in Georgia. It's going to save us money. It's going to improve our economy all around. And just in closing, let me say, whenever you have a really strong political discussion on any issue, there can be a tendency toward almost a feeling or an air of mudslinging sometimes, and it can be very heated, be very personal sometimes. I want to say very clearly to anybody who will listen, we have great public teachers in our community, and I can't speak for everybody else, but here in Bartow County, we have great public school teachers, Floyd County as well. We have school board members who genuinely care about the students in our system, who I think really want to do what is best for those students by and large. And even Dr. Barge, though I disagree with him on this issue, he lives in my district and he's a friend of mine, and we disagree. I just want to point that out, because what I don't want anybody to take away from here is that we're here to bash people who are serving our children already in those either elected or hired positions in schools. But what I do want you to take away from this is it's more important that you make a decision based on real information than based on some kind of emotional intimidation, which is what we've seen happening in a lot of these debates. So please understand, I want you to think about it logically, and then I want you to really think about the children who are asking you for your help in approving an option for them in those systems that are failing them, and the systems where they're not getting what they need. And I'm asking you to vote yes on this amendment November 6th.
Rich, closing comments, and if you or Tony could address something that was really, I think, embedded in the question that I asked Senator Rogers. There's a lot of accusations out there regarding foreign investments taking over a school system, specifically related to the school-owned school. If either one of you have any, I think it would be good to address that maybe in your closing comment.
Well, in closing, I would just like to say that I love my state. Georgia born, Georgia bred, and by golly, when I say my final farewell, I'll be Georgia dead. But we got 1.6 million students, 159 counties, 180 school districts, and of those 1.6 million students, they speak about 100 different languages. Each one of those students are uniquely different. We are making one of the biggest mistakes of our life if we continue to go down the path of putting a one-size-fits-all model being the only way we choose to deliver educational services in Georgia. I mean, the system that we have today serves a lot of people, and it serves a lot of them well. But there's a huge chunk of the population that needs something different. We talked about it earlier. Maybe it's a longer school day. Maybe it's more specialized instruction. Maybe it's just someone who just has to have a more artistic environment, or one that has to be more hands-on, more scientific, more analytical. Whatever it needs to be for that child, that's what we need to do. The school system that I grew up in as a child, it doesn't work for my two daughters. I would be one of the worst dads on the face of the earth if I simply tried to tell my kids, well, it worked for me, so therefore it's going to work for you. I'm asking you today, and for you to go and ask your neighbors, ask yourself, do you want more for your kids, or do you just want what you had? Now, if what you had was great, fine. But if in your heart of hearts, you can dig deep, and you still wish you had just a little something extra at whatever elementary, middle, and high school that you went to, then give your kids, your friends, your neighbors opportunity to have a choice so they can get that little something extra going forward.
I'll address the Gulen fear, and I do call it a fear. I know everybody's tired, but I like to tell stories, so please tolerate this one more. I've got a mother-in-law that's 83 years old. She's on the computer every day. That's all she has to do, eat. Well, that's the point. She called the other day and she said, I don't have an appetite. And I'm really worried because I read on the internet that when your appetite goes, you're about to die. I'm not kidding. She was afraid about that. And so I first said through my wife, ask her if she's constipated. I'm sorry. There can be another reason besides you're going to die that you may not have an appetite, you know. I have worked here in Georgia for 6 years, and we have some schools that were accused of being so-called Gulen schools. I've watched those schools for 6 years. Those schools were in existence for 10 years. Fulton County schools, not the state, Fulton County schools approved those schools, monitored them just like they do their own schools for 10 years. But somebody found on the internet that since they teach Turkish, and since some of their teachers come from Turkey, they're Gulen schools, which sounds ghoulish to me. It's a good thing around Halloween, right? Well, now, why would they hire people and bring them in from Turkey? Well, how many Turkish teachers do we have here? Then somebody may say, well, why are we even teaching Turkish? When I first came here, another one of our charter schools in Fulton County was criticized because they teach Arabic. In fact, someone who's well known in the community, I won't mention the name because everybody would know it in Georgia, called me and said, are they training terrorists up at that school? And I'm not going to kid you about this. He got in the newspaper. The name of the school was Amana. See, that throws people off too. You don't know what Amana means. Oh my God, that's a terrorist school. Amana's a good word. But they teach Arabic. And because the community heard, well, maybe they're training terrorists, people started getting out at the end of the parking lot with long-range cameras taking pictures of people coming in and out of the school. I guess they wanted to see if they were carrying AK-47s or bombs, but nothing ever happened, just little kids, you know, and teachers. And this other school that Fulton County has closed, you know, they closed it on the basis of a lot of things, but the big thing in the community was, well, they were doing schools, they were bringing in these teachers from Turkey, and they were teaching the kids Turkish. Well, when it comes to teaching kids today, if you will read the recommendations of the United Nations, and knowing that we're a global economy now, there are several languages that the United Nations is saying that our students should be learning. Chinese, Arabic, Turkish. I'm sorry, Mrs. McCall, who taught me. The teaching of Latin is no more being pushed, you know. So this big accusation was made, and they ended up, because there was such a fuming in the community, they closed down the highest performing middle school in the state of Georgia. And were the parents upset? You bet. Now, are they doing or are they not? I'm not the judge, but I never worried about that. Because we had American citizens there who, I guess, if their kids came home and said, they're trying to turn my kid into a gooan. You know, somebody would make some noise. Would you have said something if that was happening to your child? You know, they're trying to turn them into gooans. But here was the ironic part, and I close with this end of the story. Going back to the Bible, there is a verse that says, before you try to pick the beam, or the little speck, thank you, the speck out of someone else's eye, you should take the beam out of yours. Well, we learned after that school was closed, the school system, who criticized them for that, spent $2 million in the past year, guess what? Recruiting teachers from overseas. I just don't see it.
Dr. Reese, closing comment.
Well, you asked us to think about why, or to explain why we're in favor of this amendment and why we are all working really hard to get it passed. And I guess the answer for me is that, number one, I'm a teacher. And number two, I'm very competitive. We have a revolution in educational opportunities. A teacher's dreams has been provided to us by information technology. And we can now teach kids in the most individual way that is, again, it's a teacher's dream. Teach kids in a way that appeals to them, that works for them, for each child. And we can do that efficiently and effectively and at a lower cost. So that's possible, and that is sweeping the country. Now the competitive part. The folks who are opposing this amendment want to put a firewall on the border of Georgia, and they do not want to let this educational reform or this change, they're threatened by it, they don't want to let it into the state. Now, as an adopted Georgian, can I call myself that? A Yankee who's come to really love Georgia too. Right. Thank you. I can't stand that. I can't stand what it's going to do to our economic development. But more than anything else, we have the number of kids who quit high school in Georgia every year can fill the Georgia Dome. And that breaks my heart. And if we are going to put a firewall on the border of our state and not even give something that looks so good a chance to give all those kids in the Georgia Dome an opportunity at a life, it's just sad. It's sad and it's wrong. And that's why I'm doing it. I want Georgia to take advantage of this new thing that's just so positive and developing and do it for the kids. That's what we're all here for.
Well, can we give our panel a good round of applause for taking the time to be here?
You all were nice to tolerate us. I'll applaud you.
I think it's been very informative, and as a disclaimer, neither McDonald's, Burger King, or the Four-Way provided any funding or endorsements of tonight's forum. Thank you all so much for being here. We're 2 weeks from the election. And one thing I'll leave you with this. As you consider this, I know many of you in the room here became very outraged by the government takeover of health care. We were upset by the so-called Obamacare because it is the government totally controlling every aspect of your life when it comes to health care. They choose what type of plan you're going to have, if you have a plan, what doctor you would go to, or even what type of health care you could receive from that plan. But many of us that were opposed to Obamacare are totally acceptable of an education system that follows the exact same model to where the government decides where your child goes to school based on your address, when they go to school, and what they learn, with very few avenues to leave. This amendment simply allows an appeal process for parents who are trapped in failing schools and ability to provide a better education for their children. Thank you all for being here. Remember, please go and vote November the 6th. God bless.